In 2002, Half-Life 2 leaked online. Hidden within that leak were fragments of a darker, abandoned version of the story. Using surviving files, early scripts, raising the bar, and the playable beta, this timeline reconstructs that lost version as closely as possible. This is that story. Ten years have passed since the Black Mesa incident. In a single decade, humanity's place in the universe has been rewritten, and centuries of human advancement have been reshaped into something completely alien. How did Earth get here? The aftermath of Black Mesa was catastrophic. When the resonance cascade ripped a hole through dimensional space, the flora and fauna of the border world of Zen were displaced from their homes and scattered across Earth. Disoriented headcrabs landed in stores, leaping at a terrified population that had no idea what they were looking at. Bull squids prowled through suburbs that had once been safe only moments before. Gargantua found themselves stranded in open farmland, and oceans, lakes, and pools became infested with ichthyosaurs. Yes, the military attempted to respond to this new threat. Across the planet, armed forces fought back against the Xenian incursion as wave after wave of portal storms dragged more alien life into the world. As cities, towns, and rural communities became impossible to defend, the surviving population was moved into secure settlements under military control. Behind these walls, checkpoints, and armed patrols, humanity believed at last they were protected from the horrors of another dimension. And for a while, that was enough to create the illusion of safety. And then it happened. Without warning, entire sections of land disappeared from the hearts of populated cities, taking streets, buildings, and anyone caught within them. Moments later, those same sections returned, now carrying giant citadels that rose high into the sky. From these citadels came the real invasion. Each one became a headquarters for the force that followed, a command tower planted in the center of a populated city with its foundations driven deep into the ground beneath it. Dropships tore out across the skyline first, deploying the Combine's army into the streets below, while gunships swept ahead of them, clearing the way for the ominous cremators, towering striders, crab synths, and synthetic weapons of many varieties. Humanity resisted as much as it could, but every attempt to fight back was futile. Tanks were destroyed as they rolled towards the citadels, entire armies were wiped out, and major human landmarks and military infrastructure were reduced to rubble. Earth was already weakened when the invasion began. The initial Xenian incursion had drained military resources, shattered defenses, and forced much of the surviving population into secured settlements. The methods used to protect humanity had now made it easier for the Combine to claim them. It was on the 7th hour of this massacre that one man brought an end to the conflict. He stood at the foot of a radio tower, placed a headset over his ears, raised his hands high, and proclaimed surrender on behalf of the entire population of Earth. That man was the Consul. In the chaos of humanity's defeat, he seized as much power as any man could, and with Earth's surrender, the Combine claimed both the planet and the people living on it. From there, they did what they had done to countless worlds before. They assessed Earth by what it could offer them, what resources could be extracted, what systems could be repurposed, and how this world could be used to strengthen their universal army. Even what remained of Earth's military was requisitioned by the Combine and forced to serve beneath them as low-ranking conscripts, or die like the rest. The Consul speaks for the Combine, and for him, surrender worked out just fine. He shares in their power. The rest of Earth was not so fortunate. The Combine built the air exchange and began to reformat the atmosphere into something humanity could no longer breathe. Some regions now require a gas mask. Around the planet, giant teleporters drained the oceans, stripping away one of Earth's most vital resources, while weather control gave the Combine the ability to manipulate atmospheric pressure, temperature, and precipitation patterns on a global scale. The human population does not know if the Combine are preparing Earth for new residents, or simply stripping it of every possible resource. But even in these dark times, the strongest of humanity, the ones who still have the will to resist, understand one thing: they have to stop them. As the years have passed, Combine technology has continued to adapt the world around it. The human population has been herded into contained cities, sealed behind gates and watched from every angle. Throughout the wasteland and within the cities themselves, new structures have emerged. Factories, depots, terminals, walls, towers, and machines that cut through what used to be there, built only to secure the Combine's control of the planet and enhance their universal war machine. The Combine-controlled cities across the wasteland became perfect hubs for the containment and manipulation of humanity. From City 1 to City 17 to City 49, each one began to lose the identity it once had. Their original forms were changed, absorbed, and rebuilt beneath Combine architecture until the cities that had once belonged to humanity began to look almost identical from the outside. As for the land outside, the wasteland had become incredibly dangerous to cross. After years of Combine interference and the continued spread of Xenian life, traveling beyond the city limits was a risk few could afford to take. Antlion nests ruled by antlion kings offered an awful fate for anyone who strayed too far into their territory. Headcrabs lingered in the ruins, searching for humanoid hosts to latch onto, while the coast was left scattered with capsized boats. To keep movement between the cities possible, train lines were adapted and constructed across the wasteland, creating safe routes between these controlled hubs. Humanity was told that their containment and obedience was for their own protection. These tall walls, the guarded gates, and the Metrocop patrols, all of it existed to keep them safe from the threats outside. Within the cities themselves, control is maintained through a perfect combination of propaganda and fear. Screens are scattered across streets, terminals, factories, and public spaces, each one carrying the consul's voice directly to the citizens trapped beneath them. He tells them to relax, he tells them to report, he reminds them that compliance is safety, and that suspicion is a civic duty. The Combine needs people watching one another, doubting one another, and believing that any act of defiance is a threat to everyone around them. The streets are also littered with posters. Some advertise the Metro Police, the human volunteers who have chosen to govern their own species on behalf of the Combine. They're here for you, the posters claim. In return for their loyalty, these collaborators are rewarded with rations, stimulation, and better living accommodation. Small comforts offered in exchange for obedience and betrayal. Naturally, this feeds the paranoia even further. No one can be fully trusted. A neighbor, a co-worker, or a stranger in the street could report someone for uncivil activity and be rewarded for it. To keep the streets clean, the Combine rely on the deeply uncomfortable presence of cremators. These move through the city with a single purpose, using their immolators to remove anything biological left in their path. Bodies, waste, remains. As for punishment, every citizen understands what happens when someone refuses to comply. Manhacks, flying shredders of metal and blades, are sent racing through the streets towards those who resist, cutting them apart before they can get far. Others are taken in, questioned, and in some cases, broken down in the worst way imaginable. This fate, however, is reserved only for those who rebel the hardest. They are transformed into stalkers, mindless drones stripped of almost anything that made them human. Daily life in a Combine city is blanketed in fear, paranoia, and pain. Citizens simply exist, while Metrocops monitor the streets for civil disobedience across Terminal Square and the commercial district. In the industrial district, factories churn out weapons and tools for the Combine, and inside them, the idea of age, safety, or rights have no meaning. Children work these production lines alongside everyone else, small enough to crawl through the spaces adults cannot reach. The entertainment district offers citizens the opportunity to wind down inside of an arcade. But as expected, this is not entertainment in any normal sense. Even the places built for distraction are shrouded in propaganda and mental conditioning. Inside the arcade, citizens are given the chance to play a video game where they control a manhack and hunt down rebellious civilians, cutting through anyone marked as a threat to the system. Children born into this era are born into oppression. Their futures have already been chosen for them. They will either be fed into the factories, live in absolute fear, or sign up to work with the Combine and continue the cycle into the next generation. This way of life is the new normal under the Combine and Console's command, but not everyone is willing to let that future happen. There are still people who look at the younger generation and refuse to accept that this is all they will ever know. People who remember what Earth used to be and what humanity used to have. People who are willing to risk everything to change the future. Despite the Combine's iron grip on City 17, there are still people who resist in secret. Their presence can be seen in graffiti on the walls of monitored streets, small yet important marks that remind the broken population that there are people who work against the Combine in the shadows. These are people who know the risks, who understand exactly what happens to those who disobey, but continue to fight anyway. These resistance members are scattered all over. In City 17, Dr. Isaac Kleiner, one of the few surviving scientists from the Black Mesa incident, has established a secret base within the city itself. From this hidden laboratory, he explores teleportation technology that could one day give humanity a real advantage in a war. In the Arctic North, deep beneath the ocean, Helena Mossman works on her own teleportation device inside Kraken Base. Just beyond the outskirts of City 17, hidden within a quarry bunker, Eli Maxwell continues similar work of his own. As members of the Resistance, their research depends on secrecy, trust, and distance from the Combine's eyes, and each location offers them a unique advantage for the Resistance cause. Kleiner's location in the sewers of City 17 keeps him close enough to surveil Combine activity and relay what he finds to the rest of the Resistance. To his benefit, Barney Calhoun, a former Black Mesa security guard, has also infiltrated the Combine as a Metrocop, allowing him to gather information from within their ranks and report anything that suggests the Combine may know about Resistance activity. Helena Mossman's base is located close to weather control, the perfect location to prepare for an assault if the Resistance needed to. Eli Maxwell's quarry base, meanwhile, sits on the edge of the antlion-filled wasteland. Isolated from the city, it gives him the space and privacy to scavenge and experiment with Combine technology and to turn what he has learned into tools and weapons for the Resistance. It also serves as a safe haven for Resistance units passing through the area. In his solitude, Eli even developed a robot to keep him company and fight if he ever needed protection. Maxwell had lost a part of his leg after an encounter with a bull squid, and a dog was the perfect defense mechanism if this junkyard was ever under threat. On the western coast, another important figure played his part. After what was left of Earth's military was dismantled and absorbed into the lower ranks of the Combine's army as conscripts, the surviving members were deployed across the wasteland and stationed at critical Combine structures. One of these men was Captain Vance. As a former military officer and the assigned leader of the conscripts, Vance followed the orders he was given by the consul. Inside the air exchange, Vance and his men did everything that was expected of them, at least from the outside. They guarded the facility, they maintained their positions, they served beneath the power that had conquered them. But in secret, Vance had aligned himself and his men with the Resistance. That made the conscripts incredibly valuable to a potential uprising. They were fighters placed inside the Combine's own infrastructure to guard it, waiting for the right moment to turn that access against them. Captain Vance's daughter, Alex, had also become an important part of this hidden network. Having grown up under Combine occupation, she had been forced to become capable, careful, and resilient. With her pet alien, Skitch, at her side, Alex traversed the wasteland as she carried information between bases and scouted Combine activity. One of the people she visited most often was Eli Maxwell at his scrapyard. It is said that the two grew a pretty strong bond. Over in City 17, Captain Vance also maintained a secret bunker. A Resistance headquarters hidden near the gates leading towards the Citadel. If an uprising ever did begin, and the Resistance needed a place to establish a foothold inside the city, this place was ready to become their base of operations. So much had happened to Earth in only 10 years. Humanity had been invaded, conquered, contained, and slowly reshaped into something the Combine could control. But everything was about to change. The world had transformed since the Resonance Cascade. But outside of space-time, Gordon Freeman had experienced none of it. He had entered that green portal on that Black Mesa transit cart, moving through time, and then nothing. When he blinked, he felt a sudden chill, a sensation. He had felt nothing for some time. He was not sure if he had been sleeping, suspended, or somewhere between the two. But in the darkness, there was something else. The entity that had placed him there. The man with the briefcase. "Rise and shine, Gordon Freeman," he said. "A decade is long enough for humanity to swallow its pride and begin to accept its common fate. Long enough to develop calluses against the Master's collar. Long enough for the first scars of whiplash to begin to heal. Long enough to forget how things used to be." But not for Gordon Freeman. He still remembered how the air used to taste, how freedom felt, what the sky felt like, because that was yesterday for him. And then he felt the sudden thud of solid ground and the sound of a train. When he looked around, Gordon found himself in a train car full of sullen people, all lost in their own thoughts. There was one man, however, who had spotted Freeman. Samuel, designation G-11789RF, had noticed that Gordon did not have a gas mask on him, and out of concern for his safety, he approached him. Samuel wondered how Freeman had even been able to board this express without a mask. The air on the train was fine, but the closer they got towards City 17, the harder the air would be to breathe. Because a mask of his had failed once before, he always carried a spare and handed it to Gordon. As they spoke, Gordon could not help but notice how different the world looked beyond the windows as the train darted through the blasted wasteland. Crushed buildings, bloated trees, dirt, bull squids, head crabs, and hound eyes. After everything he had endured inside Black Mesa, and after everything he had faced on the border world, it appeared his efforts had not been enough. The resonance cascade had been stopped, but it had come with severe, unforeseen consequences. Samuel wondered if Freeman had been working out in the wasteland or at the dome in the north. Sam himself had come from City 49 after a 6-month stay there. Before that, City 40. It was this transfer he was excited about the most, however. Although the population was shuffled frequently to keep them confused, this new placement offered him an opportunity. City 17 was also the home of the consul, and Sam wanted to meet him. He wondered how people could still hate the man and hold what had happened 10 years before against him. In his mind, it was clear. Strike a deal with the alien invaders or lose everything. If anything, he believed humanity should be thanking him. As they passed through a tunnel, Gordon Freeman saw it. City 17. The window showed a mixture of human and alien architecture. People housed in apartments, streets filled with propaganda and surveillance everywhere. This was not the world he remembered, but he had been brought back for a reason. He just did not know what it was. As the train doors opened, Gordon stepped into a station that felt less like a place of arrival and departure, and more like a processing center. Metro cops watched from their stations, and the passengers moved through security checkpoints like cattle. A place like this was extremely dangerous for someone like Gordon. He had been dropped into a world that had changed so much with only basic knowledge of the new rules and customs. As he wandered the station and avoided the attention of the officers and security barriers, Freeman caught the attention of an old friend. To his luck, or perhaps because the moment had been foreseen by the G-Man, Barney Calhoun just so happened to be working that day, assigned to security at the train station. Gordon and Barney had both experienced the horrendous aftermath of Black Mesa, but before then, they had been friends. Promised beers and crawling through vents to unlock Dr. Kleiner's office after he locked himself out again. What would have been unusual to Barney was not only that Gordon Freeman was alive, or that he had not aged a day, but that he had appeared here on a seemingly random day while Barney just so happened to be working security. This could not have been by chance. He also knew that the Combine would take a special interest in Freeman, the hero of Black Mesa, a man who could be a valuable asset for the Resistance. To ensure Freeman's safety, Barney walked him to a side exit of the station, away from the security checkpoints, and told him to make his way through the industrial district and into Terminal Square, where a scout would be waiting to take him to a secure location. With a route in mind, Gordon left the station and found himself in the industrial district of City 17. It was here he saw just how far humanity had fallen, and how, through different actions, they served the Combine. The stenographer's chasm housed hundreds of people who appeared to have been forced into endless clerical labor, recording and processing information in a nightmarish working environment. Elsewhere, children were used for the kind of labor their smaller bodies made easier. These were tasked with the creation of cremators. All of this under the constant surveillance of metrocops and flying scanners. But the horror of the industrial district was not limited to the human population forced to work here. The streets also contained what appeared to be power cells, though these were not normal generators. They were horrific contraptions built to contain vortigaunts, repurposed into living batteries as their vortessence was drained to power the machinery around them. Even though Freeman had fought these creatures during the Black Mesa incident, he still tried to free them from their vorticells. At this point, however, he did not know how. After making his way through the industrial district, Freeman eventually reached the train station plaza. From here, he saw the outside of the station he had arrived through and watched as the human population was brutalized by other humans who had willingly aligned themselves with the Combine in exchange for an easier life. The people moved through the plaza looking miserable and broken down, following orders because the alternate was visible all around them. Everywhere they looked, they were reminded of what happened to those who did not comply. As Gordon looked around the plaza, he was quietly approached by Barney's scouts. The scout explained that if Freeman was going to move around the city more easily, he would need counterfeit identity papers. Once those were secured, he could reach Barney at the Manhack Arcade in the commercial district without too much attention. But as Freeman followed the scout, 2 metrocops arrived, having detected suspicious activity. They warned him that the scout was bad news and ordered him to leave. It was a command the scientist had no choice but to follow if he wanted to avoid any problems. And from inside the rising elevator, he watched the metrocops arrest the scout below. Without the papers he needed to move freely through the city, but with a clear idea of where he had to go, Gordon navigated alleys and apartment blocks until he eventually reached the commercial district. Compared to the other areas he had already passed through, this district felt slightly more relaxed, as though those permitted entry were given access to it as a reward. Even here, the same blanket of unease and propaganda hung over everything. A metro police station served as a headquarters for the metrocops, while giant screens displayed the face of the man who had sold out his species, reminding the population to comply and obey.
The true citizen knows that duty is the greatest gift. The true citizen's job is the opposite of slavery.
And then Gordon saw it, the Manhack Arcade. Inside this place of entertainment, a brief pocket of escapism from the horrors of a Combine-occupied Earth, he watched citizens line up to use the machines. Freeman glimpsed how the game they played allowed them to control flying manhacks, scoring them on how many rebellious citizens they ripped apart with the blades. This was propaganda in its purest form, a reminder of what it meant to obey and what it meant to rebel. Unknown to the players and to Gordon himself, this was not a game. Each arcade machine was linked to a real manhack, and the people they shredded were real people who had dared to rebel. Because of the constant manipulation, censorship, and propaganda forced onto them, these people would not have even questioned the reality of what they were doing. That was the horror of the Combine. They had taken a place of escapism from the outside world and turned it into another tool to enforce their rule. Within the arcade, Freeman tracked down and reunited with Barney and told him what had happened to the scouts. The undercover agent understood what that meant. As a Metro cop, he knew what usually followed an arrest of someone suspected of resistance activity, torture, or worse, a trip into the Combine system to be transformed into a stalker. But that was the risk they had taken. Bringing Freeman to the resistance was too important to abandon now. If the scientist had returned after all this time, then getting him to safety was worth the cost. With their brief meeting over, Calhoun directed Gordon through a back entrance and into the sewers to continue his journey. A short journey through the silent sewers of City 17 gave Gordon a moment to process everything he had seen since his return. This was not the world he had known. It had been reshaped, occupied, and literally poisoned by an alien empire. But the people he remembered were still here. They had survived, but their roles had changed. Beyond these sewers, Freeman discovered Dr. Isaac Kleiner's secret lab and the two reunited. Kleiner, just like Gordon, was a member of the anomalous materials team at Black Mesa on the day that had changed everything. Even though the world outside had been conquered, Kleiner had spent the years working towards one thing: securing a future for humanity. Having caught up, Kleiner decided the best course of action was to teleport Freeman out of City 17, away from the Combine's reach, so he could begin helping the Resistance properly. Eli Maxwell's teleporter was not currently operational, which meant Freeman could not be sent to the quarry. Instead, the plan was to send him north to Kraken Base. Before the trip, Dr. Kleiner reunited Gordon with a very familiar piece of equipment, something he had managed to secure and upgraded during his years in hiding: the HEV suit, and with it on, the teleportation sequence began. As the teleporter powered up, Gordon Freeman was propelled momentarily into Kraken Base. But due to an unforeseen issue, the scientist was pulled back to City 17 and the teleporter broke down. With no other option, Kleiner told him to make his way to the closest resistance base on foot, Eli's Scrapyard. To do this, Gordon had to escape the city undetected. His route took him through Breen Plaza, an entire public space dedicated to the console, dominated by a giant statue of the man who had surrendered Earth. From this plaza, Gordon found an opening into the canals beneath City 17. Although beyond the immediate reach of the Combine, the canals brought dangers of their own. Familiar headcrabs wandered in the shadows, launching themselves at anything human in the hope of creating another zombie. Hound eyes, having evolved after a decade on Earth, continued to hunt in packs, while bull squids stalked the waterways in search of prey. Above them, barnacles hung silently from the concrete, waiting for anything unfortunate enough to pass beneath them. Gordon knew these creatures. He had survived them in Black Mesa and Zen, and when they emerged around him, he put them down without hesitation. On his journey, Freeman was fortunate enough to encounter resistance units who had been given instructions by Kleiner to aid him. The toxic sludge produced by City 17 was a major hazard to traverse, but the Resistance also had a solution for this. They provided him with a small watercraft. Whether it was a jet ski or an airboat is unknown, but what is clear is that it was armed with an automated weapon. With it, the scientist fought through Xenian hazards and Combine forces who now recognized him as a threat on his way to the quarry. This settlement, known as QuarryTown, though also referred to as Traptown or Ravenholm, had once been a sanctuary for the rebellious. It had been a place where resistance members gathered in secret, organizing themselves for the uprising they hoped would come one day. But once the Combine discovered its existence, they turned it into a nightmare. By the time Gordon arrived, the town was mostly inhabited by headcrab zombies, and the method the Combine had used to destroy it was horrifyingly deliberate. Through their ability to deconstruct living creatures and reassemble them into weaponized forms, the Combine had taken the Gonarch, the final stage of the headcrab life cycle, and turned it into a biological weapon. In nature, a gonarch gave birth to countless head crabs. In the hands of the Combine, that became the basis for the head crab pod, a large metallic container designed to hold a gonarch inside it as it continuously produced more of them. One of these biological weapons, placed inside a town full of humanoids, was a death sentence. As Gordon made his way through the nightmare that QuarryTown had become, he encountered a mad monk named Father Gregory. This man had watched the population fall to the infestation, but he had not abandoned them. Instead, he remained in the ruins, determined to free them from the affliction that consumed them. With the Mad Monk's help, Gordon reached the mines where he encountered the headcrab pod that had doomed the town. Using a digger that had once been used by the settlement to drill into the mine, Freeman destroyed the device and left the horror of this town as he descended deeper into the quarry. Following a harrowing few days, Gordon eventually found himself at the entrance to Eli Maxwell's scrapyard. From Freeman's perspective, everything had happened almost without pause. The Black Mesa incident, the moment he stepped into that green portal, and then, in what felt like a blink of an eye, he was thrown 10 years into the future and placed at the center of a potential universal war. He had barely been given a moment to understand the world he had returned to. He had been forced to survive in the same way he had at Black Mesa. He had run, shot, thought, and lived. Inside, Gordon Freeman was greeted by Eli Maxwell and his defender, Dog. For the first time since his return, Gordon had found somewhere close to safety. After the biological horror of QuarryTown and the industrial terror of City 17, Eli's scrapyard felt different. It was a warm, human place on the edge of a ruined world. Gordon had already pieced together fragments of what had happened during his disappearance, but Eli was able to give those fragments shape. As a scavenger, scientist, and record keeper of the old world, Maxwell had preserved images from the invasion and the years that followed, and through a slideshow briefing, he showed Gordon the history of the decade he had missed. The slideshow began with images of Black Mesa and the test chamber where everything had gone wrong. Eli did not blame Gordon for what had happened there. The responsibility did not belong to one man. It belonged to everyone involved, and now so did the responsibility for what came next. After Black Mesa, the ripples continued to spread. The portal storms brought the Xenian infestation to Earth, and that chaos left the planet vulnerable. Then came the Combine invasion, an attack that may have been timed perfectly, striking humanity when it was at its weakest. The briefing moved through the history of Earth's collapse, the console, the deal he struck with the Combine, the world as it existed now. This is why it was so odd Gordon had appeared out of nowhere at this time when the resistance was strong enough and positioned well enough to fight back. That could not have been by chance, could it? With the air being changed, the water drained and resources stripped, Eli wondered if the Combine were preparing the planet for new residents or just gathering every resource, including the humans. For his role in this, Gordon was handed a device Eli had developed over the years, a physics manipulator, and then directed out into the wasteland towards the air exchange to play his part. The wasteland is an extremely unforgiving place. What had once been familiar land had become a vast wilderness of abandoned military machines, ruined infrastructure, and dried seafloor left behind after the global draining of Earth's oceans. In the absence of human and Combine control, the world beyond the cities had been claimed by horrific territorial creatures. On his journey north, Gordon found his path blocked and he was forced to enter a cave system in order to progress towards the air exchange. This cave system, however, was not empty. Inside, he found himself deep within antlion territory. Their larvae illuminated the dark passages, and the soldiers wandered and attacked him on sight to defend their nest. At the center, he found something horrifying. The Antlion King, the patriarchal ruler of this nest, a 60-foot giant. What happened during this encounter is not entirely clear. Some believe he fought and killed it, but it is more likely that he survived the encounter by escaping the beast rather than destroying it. Whatever the truth, Gordon made it through the cave system alive and emerged back into the wasteland. On his way, Gordon discovered a train station and the tracks appeared to lead towards his destination. This train system had been built or adapted to span the wasteland between Combine-controlled locations, with each stop along the route connecting to a depot where crews could stop, refuel, unload cargo, and take on supplies. If the tracks continued in the direction he believed they did, then this train offered him a direct route towards the air exchange. It was dangerous, but it was faster than crossing the wasteland on foot, so with little time to think, he waited for the next train and climbed aboard as it rode north. The first depot stop, attached to an old prison, came with an issue. The scientist was discovered by Combine units and was forced to abandon the train. With nowhere else to go, he pushed into the prison and fought to defend himself. From there, he made his way into the gunship bays, a regional construction site used by the Combine to prepare gunships for deployment. These creatures had been bred and weaponized for war, and even in their unfinished state, they were still capable of detecting Freeman and opening fire. However, at this stage of development, they were unable to fly and remained suspended from cranes. Gordon used the control panels to adjust their angle and height, which broke their line of sight and allowed him to push through the bay as he focused his attention on antlions and Combine soldiers. By this point, they would have known where he was trying to go. The air exchange was too important for them to ignore, and Freeman was now too great a threat to be allowed to get any closer to it, but their efforts failed. Gordon fought his way through the gunship bays and towards the next depot, leaving the facility burning behind him before he slipped on board another wasteland train. Inside a munitions car, concealed among the cranes and canisters, Gordon had a brief moment of quiet for the first time in what felt like hours. Hidden in the dark, surrounded by Combine supplies, he finally allowed himself to rest and fell asleep as the train carried him closer to the air exchange. When Gordon woke up, he had no idea how long he had been asleep. Before he could think too much, however, an explosion tore through the train and the munitions car he had been hiding in flipped onto its side. From above, he heard the voice of a woman. "Check him, Skitch. Don't move. One bite and you'll be dead by your next breath." And then he heard a thud. Within moments, Gordon climbed out of the overturned car and saw what had happened. A bomb had derailed the wasteland train, and the young woman who had spoken to him, along with her pet alien, had already taken out the Combine units nearby. This was Alex Vance, and she already knew who Gordon was. She also knew where he was trying to go. With little time to explain, they gathered ammunition from the munitions car as striders rose in the distance and Combine elite soldiers began to surround them. Together, Gordon, Alex, and Skitch fought back against another round of chaos as they pushed towards the air exchange. By the time Gordon Freeman and Alex Vance reached the air exchange, the unrest caused by Freeman's return had already spread across the wasteland. Resistance units had heard what was happening, and for the first time in years, the idea of a real uprising no longer felt impossible. Captain Vance and his conscripts had been stationed at the air exchange to protect it from resistance activity. From the outside, they were still serving the Combine, guarding one of its most important strongholds. But when Gordon arrived with Alex, Vance understood what this moment could become. The Resistance had spent years building itself in secret, waiting for the right opportunity to turn against the system from within. And now, that opportunity had arrived. The air exchange, however, was not guarded only by conscripts, but also by Combine soldiers and other creatures deeper within the facility. Ready for battle, Captain Vance and his men told Freeman how to bring it down. He would have to fight his way into the main reactor, reach the core of the facility, and sabotage it from within. As the assault began, Captain Vance and his conscripts turned on the Combine soldiers they had been stationed beside for years. Alex and Skitch also joined the attack, drawing enough attention away from Gordon. While the battle spread around him, Freeman fought his way across the air exchange and climbed towards its highest tower. There, exposed above the facility, he was attacked by a gunship. With a perfectly aimed rocket from an RPG, Gordon destroyed the creature. With his path clear, Gordon jumped from this tower into the heart of the plant and landed in a pool of industrial solvents. The corrosive chemicals should have killed him, but his HEV suit kept him safe. Within the core of the air exchange, Freeman encountered the creatures that kept the facility operating. Here, he saw what happened to those who rebelled, disobeyed, or simply became useful to the Combine in another form. These stalkers had once been human. In a sense, they still are, but they had been transformed into things that knew only how to comply, obey, and perform the tasks they had been given. Despite the danger they posed with their lasers, Freeman pushed through and sabotaged the core. And for the first time in years, the air exchange shut down, this time permanently. As Gordon escaped the facility towards the shore, something changed. Captain Vance alerted the Resistance that the air exchange had fallen, that a major Combine stronghold, one of the machines reshaping the planet, had stopped. Gordon Freeman had helped bring it down. If the air exchange could be sabotaged, then other Combine structures could be too. This was a turning point, the start of a rebellion, the beginning of an uprising. As the last trails of smoke rose from the air exchange behind him, Gordon Freeman made his way towards the shore. It is likely Captain Vance had directed him there, sending him towards the next stage of the Resistance's plan. With the air exchange destroyed and rebellion beginning to spread, there was another opportunity to strengthen humanity's fight against the Combine. Far to the north, the Arctic was home to two important locations: the secret underwater resistance facility of Kraken Base and the Combine-controlled weather control. On this shore, Gordon met Odell, the engineer of an icebreaker vessel turned resistance ship called the Borealis. To reach it, Gordon and Odell traveled by a small tugboat. However, when they reached the vessel, they found it stranded in the ice. Once on board, they began to discover what had happened here. The Combine had found it. Half of the Borealis crew consisted of scientists, and in a similar way to how they had dealt with QuarryTown, the Combine used biological warfare instead of brute force. This attack came in the form of Sactic shells, biological weapons carrying creatures that were deadlier than they first appeared. Sactics used human hosts as food to create the next generation, multiplying exponentially until there were no hosts left to feed on. Once they spread through the ship, the crew had almost no way to fight them. It was horrendous, but Odell discovered something important. As deadly as the Sactics were, they were vulnerable to the cold and appeared to huddle in the warmer regions of the ship. So, to stop the infestation, he shut off the power, and without heat, the Sactics died. Although the Sactics had been dealt with, the Borealis was not safe. As Gordon and Odell searched the ship for survivors, they fought through stalkers and zombies still moving through its corridors. Instead of survivors, they found something strange. Tanks containing frozen Combine assassins and Overwatch soldiers. With no one left to save, Gordon and Odell boarded a submarine and left the frozen ship behind. Beneath the sea, they reached Kraken Base and finally met Helena Mossman. What happened during this visit, however, is mostly unknown. By this point, Freeman had become a major target for the Combine, and somehow they discovered he was there. Kraken Base was likely attacked, damaged in the chaos as Gordon fought through stalkers and fled the facility. The fate of Odell after this point is unknown. Back on the surface, Freeman made his way to the weather control dome, where Captain Vance, Alex, and the conscripts had already begun moving into position. This giant domed facility was responsible for manipulating Earth's weather, making it another one of the Combine's most important installations. But before the Resistance could launch their assaults, a distant roar rolled across the landscape. On the horizon, a swarm of Combine aircraft appeared, closing in on the facility. The incident at Kraken Base had likely alerted the Combine to Freeman's location, and now that Resistance forces were gathering around weather control, they had brought a new wave of trouble directly to them. Explosions erupted across the icy canyon as the Combine assault began. Above them, a mech carrier moved in position and deployed a machine directly between the Resistance and the weather control dome. The mech looked very similar to Dog, and it was just as aggressive. The conscripts reacted quickly and scattered into defensive positions. Alex tried to destroy the mech with a grenade, but the throw went wide. Instead of killing the machine, it drew its attention straight to her. Luckily for Alex, before it could fire, a massive gun near the weather control dome opened up and destroyed it. With the mech down, the surviving men from the Bradleys rushed into the nearby bunkers and turned the anti-aircraft weapons against the Combine ships overhead. Alex pushed forward to help them, but this was only the beginning. New waves of shadows flooded the canyon as the main Combine force arrived. In the middle of this chaos, Captain Vance told Gordon that a cargo plane, a Lockheed C-130 Hercules, was on its way to extract him and return him to City 17 with the important chips he was carrying. Until then, all they could do was hold their ground and survive long enough for it to arrive. For some time, the Resistance fought beneath the shadow of the Combine assaults, but eventually, the C-130 reached them. Freeman and Alex boarded the aircraft, and together, they left the Arctic North behind. By the time the C-130 reached City 17, the uprising had already consumed the streets. Resistance units and conscripts had taken to the streets, fighting against Combine forces. The aircraft, however, did not make a clean landing. As it came in over the city, The C-130 crashed into a skyscraper. Freeman survived the impact, but Alex was injured in the crash. Unable to continue with him, she asked Gordon to go on without her and to find her father somewhere below. Before Gordon could help her escape, Combine forces arrived and captured Alex. With no choice but to keep moving, Freeman fought his way down through the damaged building, encountering Combine elites as he descended until he eventually reached the war-torn streets of City 17. Down here, Gordon found the conscripts pinned by an Overwatch sniper. Every time they tried to advance, the sniper fired from above and forced them back into cover, while Combine mines scattered across the road made every step forward dangerous. A wounded conscript named Peters had found himself trapped inside a destroyed armored personnel carrier, while another soldier, Manwich, attempted to reach him, but every movement drew the sniper's attention. Before Manwich could reach the APC, he was hit and killed. Gordon made short work of the sniper when he salvaged an RPG from a personnel carrier and cleared the nest, allowing Peters to finally move from the wreckage and seek medical treatment. This assault on the Citadel had been planned for years. Captain Vance had simply been waiting for the right moment to begin it. His headquarters in City 17 had been established close to the inner gates of the Citadel's outer wall, giving the resistance a foothold exactly where they needed it when the uprising began. The base had been prepared for this purpose, stocked with weapons, medical supplies, and everything the conscripts and resistance units would need to keep fighting their way towards the Citadel. Over the years, the Resistance had also learned how to adapt pieces of Combine technology for their own use. Through that tinkering, they had managed to repurpose Combine synths, including a crab synth, a creature said to be the backbone of the Combine army. To reach the gates of the Citadel, Freeman was forced underground and into the sewers beneath City 17. It was here he encountered the Hydras. These worm-like creatures were massive colonial organisms made from 3 neon blue tentacles, rising from somewhere below and stretching up towards the surface. Each tentacle ended in a different head, while the body itself was made up of gelatinous, transparent flesh, with its organs clearly visible beneath the surface. Like so much of what Gordon had encountered since his return, whether Xenian, Combine, or something in between, the Hydras were deadly, but Freeman survived the sewers and escaped them. Despite the harrowing ordeal beneath the city, Freeman eventually returned to a familiar location, Breen Plaza. But this time, the plaza was no longer the controlled public space he had passed through during his escape from City 17. It had become a war zone. The first time Gordon had stood here, he had used the plaza as a route out, slipping into the canals and leaving the city behind. Now, everything had changed. This time, his path did not lead away from the city. It led into the Citadel itself. Inside the Citadel, Gordon Freeman began his ascent. Around him, he saw countless pods suspended within the structure, each one containing a human who had disobeyed the Combine or resisted their rule. These people had been taken, contained, and stored inside the heart of the tower that ruled City 17. Upon his eventual arrival at the top, Freeman finally came face to face with the Consul, the man who had betrayed his entire species. But he was not alone. Alex was here too, contained after her capture, and so was Helena Mossman. Not as a prisoner, but there as a collaborator of the Combine. It was here that everything began to make sense. The teleportation malfunction, which may or may not have been caused by Mossman, the way the Combine seemed to know where Gordon was throughout his journey, because Resistance chatter had been reaching her, The fall of Kraken Base upon Freeman's arrival, the subsequent attack on the resistance unit at Weather Control. Helena Mossman had been a double agent working for the Combine. The Consul was also not what Gordon expected him to be. Across City 17 and across the rest of the Combine-controlled settlements, his Consul casts had only ever shown his upper torso as he addressed the human population. In reality, however, he had begun to transform himself into something else. Combine technology was horrendous, but in a mindset similar to his overlords, he had chosen to strip away his humanity in order to become something greater than human, immortal. At the peak of the Citadel during the confrontation, Alex managed to break free from her containment. In the moments that followed, Freeman aimed his pistol at the Consul, but before he could fire, Helena Mossman grabbed Alex and held her at gunpoint. And this is where the story comes to an end. How this confrontation concluded is unknown, and who survived is a mystery. The story simply cuts off here. This timeline is probably one of the toughest ones I've put together. The development of any game goes through so many decisions of what is cut, kept, and adapted. The differences between the retail version of Half-Life 2 and what we've seen in the various cycles of the beta versions are so significant. For this timeline, I went with the version shown in Raising the Bar, the wasteland train that brings Gordon into City 17, his journey towards the air exchange, Kraken Base, and the plane back to City 17. In one version of the story, Gordon begins his journey on the Borealis. In another, he was shown the fall of Earth by the G-Man. There are so many directions Valve adapted, and the concept art in Raising the Bar shows us just how different it would have been. The Antlion caves were cut and used in Half-Life 2 Episode 2. The trapped Vortigaunts in City 17 were reused in Half-Life Alyx, and the point of the air exchange was given to Nova Prospekt, a Combine stronghold taken down by the resistance that triggered the uprising. Eli Maxwell and Captain Vance were merged into one character. Helena Mossman became Judith Mossman, and Kraken Base was removed. If I have my suspicions, I believe if it is real, we will see Kraken Base in Half-Life 3. With some hope maybe the Cremators and Sactics too. They sounded amazing and biologically horrific. As for the story here, it was bare bones, and I had to take some liberties to put everything together, and while I studied Raising the Bar the best I could, we will never know how everything would have come together. That is, if there was a conclusion or explanation planned at this time of development. It seems one of the story's pillars would have been centered around the teleportation and the uprising. Would the Consul have fallen? Would the Citadel like it did in the retail version? What were the chips Captain Vance gave to Gordon, and what was their purpose? I think for the most part, the cuts were needed. The slideshow briefing section went against Valve's show don't tell rule, but that does not make these parts any less interesting. The removal of children completely in place of the suppression field and cut of Cremators is a tough one for me because I love the idea behind them, but Valve did sneak a little Easter egg in there. The head of a Cremator can be seen in a jar in Eli's lab. This suggests that while we do not see them in the retail version, they still exist out there in the wasteland or other cities. The concept art shows a drastically different world to the one we received, and the different versions of the scripts give insights into how the world was built. This timeline could have been put together in a completely different way, and I wanted to show it in my way, to explore the story of an iconic part of gaming. So, why is this abandoned version of the story so important? It lets us wonder what Half-Life 2 might have been, while already helping us appreciate why the version we got became so powerful. I wanted my first timeline of the year to be something I could properly dive into, searching through old maps, scripts, and most importantly, raising the bar, which is basically the Half-Life 2 development bible, was how I wanted to start off this year. I've made a pretty big change to my content this year too, with a different voiceover and editing style, adding in-game audio to really enhance the lived-in experience, and by far the thumbnails, handcrafted by my thumbnail artist, Chick. He always knocks them out of the park, but this one is incredible. I really wanted it to show the difference between the characters in the beta and retail. This video took a lot of work, and after spending so much time digging through this darker version of Half-Life 2, it has made me curious what everyone else has been playing lately. For me, as I said in my last video, most of my gaming time over the past month has been taken up by Starfield. Shipbuilding, base building, resource gathering, and exploration are all things I love in a game, and it just helps me switch off. What are you playing currently? At last, a huge thank you to those who help support on channel members and Patreon. I normally post scripts, wallpapers, and thumbnails for the videos as much as I can there, so thank you Queen Arby, Lewis, Oren X, Drakey Phoenix, Danocal Drawings, 501st Clone Boy, Ruben Mendoza, Imperial Embers, Canifex, Jimsy, Average Soul, Azu, Jonas, Yali Rodriguez, Detroit, Motzi, Brina Lee, Jacqueline Lavelle, King Jack, Lifeblood, Reaper Gaming, Mamet, Kai the Zin, Zuni115, Full Classic Source, Pooncake, Pointless Man 47, Super Rifle, Frankie, Tiki, and Epic Stuff Things channel. If you enjoyed this timeline, why not check out the combined timeline? See what I did there? Of the Half-Life and Portal series, or check out why the Vortigaunt's are the real villains of Half-Life here. And finally, as the legendary hero Reaver once said, tatty bye.